Welcome to Dedicated. Today we're with J.D. Barker. Since his debut novel just over 10 years ago, he has taken the thriller and suspense category by storm. He's one of the most successful authors out there. He even has his own imprint inside Simon Schuster, something I don't know of any other author having, so we'll learn more about that. He's one of the most talented authors working and also one of the most innovative when it comes to the business side of publishing. Can't wait to talk about all of it. JD, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And this is the first White Russian we've ever had on the show, so I'm excited to get that going.
I honestly thought this was a publicity thing, but we are literally sitting here with the bottles, so it is happening.
It is definitely happening. I don't know much about the drink, other than it was the Jeff Bridges, the Dude drink, I think, Big Lebowski, right?
You know, to me, it's adult chocolate milk. Like, I've never grown out of chocolate milk, and like it's my all-time favorite drink. I have never learned how to make it because I am deathly afraid of, like, if I understand what actually goes into this, I have no idea how many I'll start drinking at home. So this is very dangerous because I'm watching you do this, and it doesn't look very complicated.
It's not. It's pretty simple. It does taste like an adult Yoo-hoo.
Yeah.
And so it's just 2 parts vodka, 1 part Kahlua, topped with heavy cream. I'd like you to note, or organic heavy cream.
Perfect.
So
okay.
Put the good stuff for you. See if this matches what you are getting in the New Hampshire pubs.
You need a microphone on the glasses.
Yeah, to really get the sound effects going. Yeah. All right, so you and your daughter have been touring around New York City so far today. You guys picked a good day for it.
Yeah, it's our first father-daughter trip all by ourselves. We left Mama at home, and we've been having a ball. We hit I didn't even know this place existed, but the Museum of Ice Cream yesterday.
Oh, nice.
So it's exactly what it sounds like. You walk through the door, they hand you ice cream. Every single room you walk into, they hand you more ice cream. They tout unlimited ice cream while you're there, and they are not lying. So, like, by the time you walk out of there, you probably had 5 to 10 scoops of ice cream. Yeah, crazy place to bring your kids. Somebody's
pace yourself up front.
I look at all these things. You know, it's funny you mentioned the business side of stuff, but every time I walk into a place like that, I look at it first as a dad, and then I start doing the numbers. Like, somebody's making a lot of bank because they're charging $50 a pop to get in there. They're probably spending $4 or $5 on ice cream for everybody that walks through the door. Yeah. So somebody's driving a nice car because of this business.
Hopefully, the rent's pretty high in New York City.
It is.
Cheers, JD.
All right, cheers. Well, that is perfect.
That is yummy. I haven't had one of those in forever. That's good. So I've done some reading up on you, of course, and I watched some of your other interviews online, too, which are fascinating. I'm really dying to talk to you about all sides of this. But we'll start at the beginning. You were born and raised early, I think, in Illinois, and then at 14 moved to Florida?
Yeah, I was born in Crystal Lake, Illinois. It has nothing to do with the Friday the 13th movies, but that obviously hit pretty hard there. My dad was a contractor, and at one point he just got tired of the Chicago winters. He just couldn't do it anymore. So he loaded up the family. We moved down to Florida. Honestly, I hated it because...
I was going to say, 14 is a tough age to make...
Yeah, because like I had to leave all my friends behind. I lived in the same house, pretty much my entire life, and all of a sudden we got uprooted and moved to this totally different place. But it wasn't just that. Like, there's no seasons in Florida. There's hot and there's hotter. Yeah, so I had a snowmobile, and like we took the tracks off and we put wheels on it. We tried to make it work, but like it's Florida, so like I missed it. So like it's the first opportunity that I had to get out of there, I did.
So in those early years, I mean, so many people come on the show, and one of the things that's a common thing among writers is they're comfortable being alone. And when you went to Florida, I wonder if that had something to do with, well, I haven't made new friends right away, and so the library is often a place some people go, or they read books, and they have sometimes that sparks a little bit of creativity.
I'd been reading pretty much my entire life. We grew up without a TV in the house, and this is the 70s, so that's not saying much. There were 3 channels, so there was nothing worth watching anyway. But we hit the library all the time. I was reading by the time I was 3. By the time I got into kindergarten, I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew mysteries, moved on to Charles Dickens. I was a huge Charles Dickens fan. And the first adult book that I ever picked up was Dracula. My mom owned an antique store, and we used to hit a lot of garage sales, and I remember seeing a box of books. They were 25 cents each, and Dracula was sitting up on the top. The cover looked really scary, and I picked it up, and I was like, there's no way my mom's going to let me buy this. I was 8 years old, but she let me buy it, and I took it home, and I tore through that book, and then I slept with the lights on for like the next 3 weeks because it scared the bejesus out of me. But that's the first time I ever had
that exact copy.
I don't have that one, but I've got plenty of other ones. That was the first book that got an emotional reaction out of me, because it literally frightened me, and I've been chasing that feeling ever since, as a reader and as a writer.
For me, it was Lord of the Flies. That was the first book that really traumatized me, and my son is now reading it in high school. I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember that book really affecting me. So I also noticed you and I are both high school class of '89. Which is like right in the wheelhouse of Stranger Things. You know, I watched that show. I'm like, oh my gosh, the Trapper Keeper. It's all what I had in high school.
I get real nostalgic when I watch that show. I'm sure that's no mistake.
Yeah, I think those guys. I tried to do the math one time. I think they actually are class of '89, or maybe 1 year off. They might be '88. Like that.
I don't know if it's just me, but like there's something about that period. I love writing books that take place in that period. Like there's just something about it where everything just resonated. Like once all the electronics kind of kicked in the world, people got cell phones in their pockets. A lot of magic left the world.
Yeah, I totally agreed, and it's much easier. I love reading books set in that thing, which is probably why I loved your something I keep upstairs too. That just had that kind of feel of.
Yeah,
I don't know, that remote island.
Well, it was, the 80s were a time where, like our parents kicked us out of the house on Saturday morning, said, do not come back until it's dark out. And they didn't care what we were doing and they knew we were okay. Yeah. And, we just kind of went off and did our own thing. And like, it just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. So you make it out of Florida and you have a career in finance.
Yeah.
So you're a late comer to, class of '89 high school, but your first book was about 10, 11 years ago. So you had a whole career before this in finance. What were you doing?
I did what I was told to do. Like my parents encouraged me to read. They encouraged me to write, but they always added the caveat, writing is a fantastic hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You have to get a real job. So I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I finished up high school. I went off to college. I got a couple degrees and ended up working behind a desk in finance, like you said. My last real job, I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm, which is as horrible as it sounds. It's like being internal affairs at a police department or being the guy responsible for lost luggage at the airport. Yeah. It's one of those jobs nobody wants, but everybody's glad you're there when something bad happens. But I would come home at night and I would write. That's how I stayed sane. And I started that
as a hobby. Right?
As a hobby, yeah. It was just something. Initially, just started off as something fun. In college, I worked for RCA Records and BMG Distribution. I was essentially a glorified babysitter.
Where did you go to school?
The first one was Art Institute in Fort Lauderdale, then University of Miami. So if they had a recording artist come into South Florida, I'd have to pick them up at the airport, get them to the radio station for their interview, get them to their concert, get them to their hotel. If you ever saw that movie, Get Them to the Greek, that was essentially my life. And I was, at the time I was in school, which was expensive, and I realized I've got some very famous people in the car with me. So I started to interview them. And
who were some of the folks?
This is going to date me. So Tiffany, Debbie Gibson, New Kids on the Block, Madonna. Yeah. Then we had all the hair bands. Madonna, yeah. Big. Poison, Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, Guns N' Roses. If I had everybody from Guns N' Roses in South Florida for like a week and I got them back on an airplane without somebody getting lost or arrested, like that was a win.
I was going to say, were there any pit stops with Guns N' Roses to do something?
There were pit stops with everybody. It was a wild time. But I would sell those interviews to magazines like 17 and Teen People, and that's how I broke into the industry.
Like almost famous a little bit.
Very, very similar to that. When you work in that world, you quickly realize everybody's got a novel at some stage of development in a desk drawer somewhere. It's 400,000 words long. They've been working on it for the last 10 years. It's almost done. They feel it needs a little something, and I kind of became the guy they would show those to, and I would help them edit, and I would help with developmental suggestions, and that just turned into a side hustle as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, which is what I would do at night. So I would come home from the corporate job, and I would work on those projects at night.
So I was curious how you got your start in it. So you did a lot of ghostwriting, book doctoring, as you say, which is sort of helping someone along with their project. And I was wondering how you got your first gig in that. So you're working in finance, but it was through those meetings.
It was through those, yeah, just working, with people, somebody.
Big memoirs, like rock and roll star memoir type.
The memoirs were crazy. There's a lot of NDAs there. The very first one was a Miami Dolphins football player. I was at one of the games and I was on the sidelines down on the field, and I literally just walked up to a player and we were talking. I was like, hey, have you ever considered writing a book about your life? Because he had a crazy life. And I can't say who it was, but it's somebody everybody knows. And he said, yeah, I get approached for that kind of thing all the time, but I can't write and I don't have the time for it. So, we talked for about 20 minutes and we just kind of worked out a deal. His agent ended up going to the publishers and saying, this guy's willing to do an autobiography. They offered him a very large advance. I took 50% of that advance and I wrote the book for him. So I just interviewed.
Under an NDA. So that was a strictly ghost writing.
Completely
thing
100%.
You're not mentioned anywhere.
Yeah, my name is nowhere.
And you probably did so much more collaborative writing where you're credited somewhere in the book. Like Agassi had that book Open, that was written really by a very talented writer who I think was credited.
See, I never got credited, and I think that was
on any of them.
On any of them, some memoirs. I finished a lot of fiction projects for other people. Yeah. Over 23 years, I had 6 different books that hit the New York Times list that all came out with other people's names on the cover that I wrote. Yeah. And that was the kicker.
An interesting thing. I just saw this in one of your talks online. And it sort of represented for you the breaking point. So you're doing well. You've got a boat. You're in this. Your family's starting. but you're launching books onto the New York Times bestseller list. And as I heard it, there were 2 books that were thrillers. I mean, this is like in your wheelhouse. This is what you want to do. It's sort of handed to you, sort of half-baked. You write the book, launch it on the bestseller list, and you're like, that's it. I'm going to sell the house, sell the boat. We're going to pare it all back to a duplex in Pittsburgh, and I'm going to go for it. I'm just going to write now.
Yeah, that's essentially what happened. So the last book, it was a thriller. It was somebody that we see on the list every single year, and he just fell behind. He had to leave for a book tour, and he was only about halfway done with the book he had to turn in. So they brought me in as a hired gun. They gave me the first half of the book. They gave me his outline for the second half, and I had to finish it up. And that one hit the New York Times list, and that's where we pulled the trigger.
That's amazing. So first of all, of course, I'm dying to know who it is, and of course, you've got some ironclad NDA and can't say who it is, but how about like a J.D. Barker, Dan Brown series of puzzle breadcrumbs? It would have had to be in like a 2012 bestseller or something.
I'm sure somebody will figure it out sooner or later, but too many NDAs and too many dollars, and I'm not going to be the one to put it out there.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. So there are books out there that you have done that we don't even know about.
It happens honestly all the time, but and I was 43 when I published my first novel under my own name, and I've often wondered what would have happened if I had done that in my 20s. And honestly, I don't think I would have hit as well as I did, because it took those 20 years of working behind the scenes, of talking to editors, talking to agents, finding out what works in a book and what doesn't work. That's where I really cut my chops and learned how to write.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I was actually just talking about that very thing to a friend. Someone was asking. And I get this question a lot. A college English lit major dreams to be a novelist. Like, I'm going to go write. I'm like, please do not go rent some, studio flat walk up in Brooklyn and declare yourself a novelist and try and do it. Like, go work. You can do it like you did it, like many other people did it. Write in the evenings and on the weekends. Get a job. Fill up your well. Develop your view of the world and what you have to say about it. You don't need to run and be a novelist at 22. There's a lot of stuff you can do. You can always write. Sort of as a moonlighting thing first, I think is a much healthier way to go.
Well, and a lot of it you're pulling from your own experiences. So what kind of experiences do you really have at 20 years old? I had a lot more by the time I hit 43 than I did at 20. So it's a very different set of books.
So you do pare it back to the Pittsburgh duplex. You're going for it. You do your first book as an indie author, meaning you sort of self-publish and you hustle. Yep. And it's like a home run.
Yeah, I got crazy lucky with it. We ended up moving about 250,000 copies of this indie published title. Now, there's reasons for that. Like Stephen King read the book very early on, and he gave me his blessing to use some of his characters.
Stephen King?
Oh, that's another whole story. How much time do we have?
We have about
my wife is a very smart woman, so she's the one who pulled the trigger on us basically selling everything we have and buying the duplex so I could quit the day job. She pushed me into that, and it was her idea. Yeah, so I handed her the manuscript for my first book. It was called Forsaken, and in the book I had to explain where the wife buys a journal. So just to get the book done, I wrote that this woman walked into Needful Things and bought it there, Stephen King's store. Fully expected to have to change that because you can't just do that sort of thing without a bunch of lawyers jumping down your throat. But my wife read it, and she said, before you change it, let's try to get his permission. I'm like, how do you get Stephen King's permission to do anything? Turns out he's got a house in Florida that's about 10 minutes from my mom's house. So we happened to be down there. We printed up the manuscript, hopped in the car, and we figured we're going to go over to Steve's house. Maybe he's outside gardening or something. We'll hand him the manuscript. He'll give us a big thumbs up, and we'll be on our way. That's how I pictured it in my head. It was nothing like that. So he lives on a little island off the coast called Casey Key. You go over a tiny little bridge. If you make a left, you go to the entire half of this island, that has restaurants and bars and hotels and condos. And if you make a right, it's like the entire half that Stephen King owns. Uh-huh. There's immediately a private drive sign. There's a no trespassing sign. There was a gate and another gate. And we got about halfway to his house, and I'm watching the trees for snipers, thinking this is probably a really bad idea. So we turned around, went to a restaurant. I called a friend of mine who knew King really well, a guy named Jack Ketchum. He passed away a few years ago. And I told him what we were doing. He said, oh, yeah, don't stalk Steve. He hates that. Here's his email address. Just send him the book. If he likes it, he'll get back. If the book is garbage, you probably won't hear from him. And I got an email back from King.
That's amazing. As busy as he is, he read an inbound manuscript like that. Good for him.
Yeah, I mean, he's one. There's certain people that I've met in this industry that just go above and beyond all the time, and I think it's because they've all been there. They've all been in that position, just starting off. They know what it's like, and authors in general are.
King, I mean, yes. But he must get 1,000. Something you either caught it like on a good day, or he had a free moment and then loved the first paragraph and just kept going.
I'm guessing the Sox probably just won a really good game, and he was in a crazy good mood, and it was total luck.
I mean, there are 10,000 people a month asking him for a blurb or to read a manuscript or something like that. So that it's amazing that he did that. I love
I mean, I handed you a book when I walked in here called A Caller's Game. I gave it to you because it actually takes place in this building, which I thought was kind of neat.
Yeah.
But when that was coming out, I sent King copies of all my books.
Blows up the Sirius XM building, 1221 6th Avenue, in his book.
In that book. When it was coming out, I sent King a copy of it, and Amazon delivered it for me. And I got a phone call from the Amazon delivery guy, and he said, "It's pouring rain out here. I have to leave it at your gate. I can't get to the house." So I emailed King and told him that the book is sitting out there, and he actually got an umbrella out, a raincoat or whatever, walked out to his gate, got the book, and went back in his house. You know, like he is just an all-around good guy.
That's great to hear. I love it. Because I mean, that would have been 2012. I mean, he was, or so, when you gave him Forsaken, and that's...
Yeah, Forsaken was around 2013 or so. Caller's Game was maybe 2019, 2018.
So let's talk a little bit about the business side of it. So that first book was indie. You sell 250,000 copies. You're making, as an indie author, most of the money goes to you. 70% or so goes to you, as opposed to the traditional publishing path, because you're taking all the risk. You've got to package up the book. You've got to get the cover art. You've got to do the distribution. Like, you're basically sticking it on Amazon, really, for sales, I guess.
Yeah.
And whereas the traditional publishing route, they do all that stuff for you. They have, an art department that makes the cover. They handle the distribution. They've got editors and all this sort of support in there. And therefore, the writer gets about, on a hardcover book, if it's listed at $30, the author gets 15%, or basically $4.50 per hardcover sale, and it's because the publisher's taking on the risk, really. I mean,
right.
So they might pay you in the traditional publishing lane. Let's say an author gets $100,000 advance for their book. The risk is you might sell 1,000 copies and the publisher's left holding the bag, having, paid an author a whole bunch of money. But in books that do earn out, meaning you sort of sell enough that your whole advance is repaid to the publisher, you're only getting 15%. Whereas an indie author, if you're successful, you're getting a much, much bigger take.
Yeah. I mean, when you start doing the math, I mean, in my world, like, I got a taste of being an indie author, and part of me wishes I had never seen that, because it's like a peek behind the curtain. Once I saw all those things, I couldn't get that out of my head. Like Fourth Monkey, which was my next book, I got a 7-figure advance for that. We had a TV show and a film deal attached.
So the next book went traditional publishing.
Yeah, it went traditional. And again, that was my wife's idea. Like, I was fully ready to indie publish that because of the economic benefits.
How did that happen, by the way? So, people must have taken note that you sold 250,000 copies.
It changes things.
And you got a bunch of inbound calls from publishers?
Yeah. So with Forsaken, my first one, I queried around 200 agents, and it was crickets. I barely got any, because, and I don't blame them. I had nothing I could show them, no track record, nothing like that. But when you hit, those kind of numbers, everybody knows. So when I sent Fourth Monkey out, I queried 53 agents. I had 14 offers within 2 weeks. It was like being the kid in high school who plays football really well. Like, every school was calling. I ended up going with an agent. She took Fourth Monkey out there, and I remember I was on a run. I love to run, and she called me up and she said, "Hey, we just got a preemptive offer out of the UK for $160,000." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to run home and tell my wife." And I ran home, and by the time I got home, we were at like 200,000. Told my wife we're going out to dinner. By the time we got to the restaurant, there were multiple publishers involved. We were at 600. And by the time we left the restaurant, we had broken 7 figures with the film and TV show attached. So, like, my life literally changed, within the course of a couple of hours.
Good agent, by the way, getting that
fantastic agent. Yeah, I mean, she had the film side, scrambling at the same time as the publishing side, and that's how you got to do it in this world. It's all about creating buzz.
So now you've created something a little different, this sort of hybrid model of which hybrid, it's new enough that it's a little misunderstood, or there are multiple definitions. Sometimes it sounds like hybrid means I'm going to go traditional domestically, but indie internationally, or it could also mean I'm just going to have sort of a shared responsibility with the publisher. Like, they're going to do some things and I'll pay for others. And so it's like how do you define it, and what kind of hybrid stuff are you doing?
Yeah, so my first book in this world was Caller's Game, where I basically sent it off to my agent, and I called her up and said, "I'm going to publish this in English on my own. You can go ahead and sell to the foreign territories the way you normally do." And I'm in about, I think, 150 different countries, 20 some different languages. So she focused primarily on that. And then I used my own independent press and put it out in English. So UK, Canada, Australia, places like that. And it worked really well. I got the economic benefits of being an indie, but I still had all the foreign deals, so I was still in all those markets.
So basically anything English language, you get 70% because you're doing backbone work. everything international, they're doing it, and you get 15 or whatever the standard.
Yeah, and I could piggyback on their advertising. They're putting money out there, and I'm putting money out there, so we're all kind of helping each other sell the book, and that worked great. I did that for a number of titles, but I still had the same problem that most indie authors had. I couldn't get into all the places that I wanted to. I couldn't get into like Costco. I couldn't get to Target or Walmart, the big box stores. So I'm always looking for all these good things happen. I tend to focus on the negative and try to find solutions for those negatives. So in my mind, I was trying to figure out how do I get into those particular stores.
And what's the answer?
Well, the answer came about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I had another book coming out called Behind a Closed Door. I sent it off to my agent. We got film interest from Hollywood right away, and that got optioned. It was about to go to auction with the publishing companies, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine who worked at Random House, and she said, listen, we're about to offer on your book, and when that offer comes in, you need to turn it down. And I asked her why, and she said, well, we're about to lay off a number of people, and the editor who wants your book is on that list. You don't want to get caught up in that mess. Got a similar phone call from somebody at HarperCollins, and then within like 3 weeks, all these industry layoffs happened, including the people that were looking at the book, which scared me, because if you've ever had a friend who has a book that loses their editor, that book can end up in limbo forever, depending on your contract. So I went back to my finance contacts. I'd come out of that world. I'd been about 8-9 years or so, but I had heard that Simon & Schuster had recently gotten bought by private equity. So I reached out to some friends in finance, got a hold of people in that private equity firm, and started some back channel conversations. And ultimately, we ended up landing on a deal. I created my own imprint at Simon & Schuster, so I can basically act as an indie author. I can publish what I want whenever I want.
Do you publish other authors too, or just your stuff?
I don't yet, and mainly because of the accounting. Accounting for that is kind of a nightmare.
Like, would they give you a slush fund to say, because you probably have to pay some advances, or maybe you have some sort of arrangement, but you might need a little money to sort of bring in some writers?
Yeah, well, the way it works is I'm essentially my own publishing company, so all of that money comes out of my own pocket. If I do a print run of 50,000 copies, I pay for that print run. Simon & Schuster is strictly there as a vehicle. They're handling my print sales and distribution.
And that's the way to get into Costco. And
yeah, because they've got no real skin in the game. If the book does well, they do well. If the book does poorly, they still do well. So they don't care. But as a publisher, I need to make sure the book does well.
Yeah. So that's the arrangement with SNS, basically distribution to the places you could not otherwise reach.
Yeah, and I honestly think, in this, I think that's where this industry is going. Because if you talk to an indie author who's doing really well, if you're a big publisher, you can walk up to that person and say, I will give you $1 million for your next book. And they're going to turn it down because they can make that $1 million on their own, but they still can't get into those particular places. So if the publisher approaches it as a partnership, you act as your own publisher, we handle the back end, that to me makes a lot of sense. That's how you get Frida McFadden, Colleen Hoover, some of these big names to cross over that line.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen attempts at some sort of middle ground in the past, because if you're a huge name and you're making, you're going to sell. They don't even need to do the kind of heavy lift to get an unknown writer to be a big bestseller if you're already a household name. And so some of the folks I know who are household names say, if I structure a deal and I earn out, I've made the wrong deal. Like, they don't want to make 15%, they want to make 30%. So if they know their track record, they're going to sell 1 million books and therefore should earn $4 million. And they'll say, well, that means I want my advance to be $8 million. So I'm essentially getting 30% of MSRP instead of 15. So this is getting a little wonky in the numbers, but
that's
attempts at trying to solve the problem you're talking about.
That's the reality of it. But to me, that's not a partnership. Now you're still an employee, and I don't want to be an employee. I'd rather be the partnership.
I don't know if you know Madeline McIntosh. She was former CEO at Penguin Random. So big CEO of one of the biggest firm. She's no longer there, and she started a new hybrid publisher where she's trying to do exactly that, where it's shared risk. There's no advance to the author, so everyone's sort of in it. Whatever investment is made in advertising or in the print run size, things like that, that all goes in, and they all invest together, and then they all basically are sharing the back end. Mm-hmm. And then for people, and then the author has total control too. Like once you sort of take an advance, you've ceded control. So she's really appealing to big name authors or, the Guns N' Roses guys, the celebrity memoir type folks. But that hybrid publishing, I'm starting to see more business models out there, people trying to do that.
I'm seeing a lot of things that are different, which is refreshing, because if you go back, for the last 20, 30, 50 years, nothing's changed. Amazon came in as a disruptor. They've changed the model a little bit. But Simon & Schuster, to me, really is a game changer, because they're approaching this, from the eyes of a private equity firm.
So were you dealing, KKR is the firm that bought them. Were you dealing with someone at KKR? Was it Jonathan Karp, the CEO of SNS?
I don't want to start throwing names out there because I don't want them to get flooded with with phone calls and emails, but it was a mix of both. Like once
Karp's a great CEO, visionary guy, and
that's the thing. They look at something like Simon and Schuster, and they look at it as a business, and like, how do we get this business to make money? They don't look at it as specifically as a publisher. A lot of people, you hire somebody at Penguin Random House, they're coming in because they're a book lover, and that's going to be 100% of their focus, when they really just need to be somebody who sells a product. They have to be able to sell a widget, and it doesn't matter whether it's a book, a glass, or a bottle.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to circle back to one comment you made about that phone call you got with the warning that the editor who's about to acquire your book is getting let go. So in the publishing world, that's called being orphaned as an author.
Yeah.
You get orphaned when the editor working on your book is let go, and then suddenly you are looking for a new editor who's going to sort of champion you. So that happened to me. I was at SNS, and the editor, who I love, she's great. She was the editor and publisher of the imprint where I was. First book went out, great. She acquires a second book. Months after she acquires it, and months before pub, she is let go. And she's super terrific and landed on her feet and has done great things since. But because she was, editor and publisher, she was an expensive person, and therefore a nice opportunity for savings, as these publishing houses have, of course, been skinnying down for years now. And so then I was orphaned, and they actually kept her on freelance to sort of finish the edit, and then a little bit before pub date she was gone. But you lose that champion inside, so that is a tough situation for writers when they get orphaned that way, because whoever sort of reached out and grabbed the book and acquired it and like believed in it, they're no longer there. It just gets assigned to someone's like, okay, I'll see it through. It's a very different experience.
Yeah, but what you mentioned is basically touching on a much bigger problem, because that's what they're doing. They're cost cutting from the top down. And sure, it's big savings, but they're taking the people who actually know what they're doing and they're replacing them with people that don't have that experience. And that's a short-term fix. It's a Band-Aid for any business. You can only keep that up for so long. And then on the flip side of that, when you look at their roster, the biggest selling authors that they have are all aging out. They haven't figured out how to replace them with new blood coming up, and all of that is a problem that's coming to a head.
Yeah. Well, I think they're leaning on these big names. This kind of gets back to the hole you were filling there for a little while, finishing off some books. They lean on these big names to do so many books, and not everyone can do it.
No.
Which actually leads us to your process, because you have been prolific and you've been doing an amazing job. Like this book is something I keep upstairs. It's been getting Stephen King comparisons. Of course, him, but the comparisons are amazing, because I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and this really, like, the comparisons are apt, and it's really well done. It handles sort of multiple dimensions and time travel in a way, but it has a little bit of a Sixth Sense feel to it as well, and it's just a terrific book and complex, and handling those kinds of themes and the complexity is amazing. And I don't know, you must be working like 20 hours a day, because I know you've got a few books in the market at the moment.
I'm a bit of a workaholic. That one was just a fun book for me to write. Like, I had the tagline for the book came to me first, and the tagline is, "For a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die." Mm-hmm. It's all about a kid who inherits a house on a private island. He's 17 years old. It's his last year in high school. He does exactly what you expect him to do. Him and his friends turn it into a party house. But that gets old after a while, and at some point somebody raises their hand and they say, "Hey, what would it take to make this house haunted?" And they start right where you would expect. There's some scary stories, there's a Ouija board, but that tagline kind of says it all. For a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die. Mm-hmm. So you know where they're going, but a book like this is really all about the journey.
Yeah. And it's called a chiller too, which I love. It's sort of
I stole that from Peter Straub. So I am known primarily for writing thrillers. I personally don't see this as a straight up horror novel. I think it's somewhere in between there, and that's kind of what I like to write. Like, I see it as a
Stranger Things vibe to it.
Yeah, it's a thriller with a lot of horror elements to it, but at its core, it's still a thriller. But a chiller just kind of fit.
Yeah, I love it. Let's talk briefly about your process. You have credited James Patterson with turning you from a pantser, meaning a writer who writes by the seat of his pants with no outline, into a writer who uses outlines. Can you talk about that transition? Thanks to James.
Yeah, this is all his fault. So he, when Fourth Monkey was coming out, HMH, which is HarperCollins now, they scattershot copies of a book like that out to all the big names, hoping to get a blurb for the back cover. And Patterson happened to be one of those guys who got one, and he liked it enough where he called me up and asked if I would like to meet with him and possibly collaborate on something. So we set up a lunch in Florida, and sat down and we started talking, and then that's where the whole pantser outliner thing came up. And if you're a writer, it's two totally different camps. It's night and day. And, we figured we wouldn't be able to work with each other just because we were so different. So I walked away from that lunch thinking, I just had lunch with, James Patterson. That's awesome. That was a win. I didn't think anything would come of it. And then we talked again a couple of months later. And he's like, you know what? Let's try it your way. Let's try to pants a novel. So I would write a chapter. I'd send it off to him, paint him into some kind of impossible scenario, thinking there's no way Jim's going to get out of this. He's a smart guy. Not only did he get out of it, 15 minutes later, he would send me other pages back and put me in an even worse position. And we just tried to keep one-upping each other through this whole book.
So it just sort of like ping-ponged
We ping-ponged back and forth. And like, it is the twistiest novel I've ever worked on because,
What's the name of that one?
It's called The Coast to Coast Murders. Okay. So we finished that up.
Was it written from two perspectives, like one character than the other?
No, we were
sort of a through line and consistency.
We were both writing the same characters, the same POV type stuff. Like,
do you feel so I haven't read that one. Do you think a reader would be able to tell a different person wrote?
No, and honestly, that's one of the reasons why I did so well as a ghostwriter. I'm autistic. I've got a form of autism called Asperger Syndrome. And one of the things that people that are autistic do is we mimic others. And I learned a long time ago I can mimic people on paper. So if I see something written by somebody else, I can pick up on their vocabulary, their cadence, their writing style, and literally create a seamless transition where even I can't tell the difference between their writing and my own. So when I write with somebody like Patterson, we can, there's complete synergy there.
Do you find then you need to be careful about what you're reading while you're writing? Like, as you're outside reading, like, I'm not going to read this or that'll show up in my writing?
I used to, because it would definitely do that. I've learned to be able to turn that on and off over the years. Mm-hmm. But I can flip a switch and say, okay, I'm going to write a paragraph that sounds like John Grisham. I can write Stephen King. Yeah, but I mean, the hard part, honestly, was finding my own voice, figuring out what I sounded like.
And have you?
I did. Yeah, it came out in Forsaken, and I've been tweaking it ever since.
Okay, so you can almost sort of slot into a particular mode as needed.
Yeah, it's and the characters are the same way. Like, to me, they are real people. I'm watching a movie play out in my head, and I'm writing down what I see. But like, their voice, their mannerisms, all those things are all very different from each other. If I sat down with a psychologist, they'd probably tell you I'm schizophrenic and I'm just not medicated. But like, to me, they are different people living inside my head, and I'm putting it all down on paper.
So do you think you could ever jump genres? Like, I'm going to do an Amor Tolls, and then I'm going to do a Danielle Steele, and then I'm going to do a Stephen King.
I did that back in the ghostwriter days, so I know I can do it. But my passion is writing thrillers and horror, so that's where I stick now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. All right, so back to a few more process things. I have also read that you like to read with headphones on, with sort of like stormy white noises in the background. That sort of locks you into your writing mode.
Yeah, I've been doing that ever since I was in the corporate world because, at the time I was working 60 to 80 hours a week and I had to squeeze out words whenever I could. And I learned that listening to a thunderstorm soundtrack, if I did that every time I had to write, it's a Pavlov's dog thing.
Thunder and lightning.
Yeah, it's literally white noise, just, rain and thunder and lightning. But whenever I hear that sound, my brain snaps to attention. It knows that it's time to write. Mm-hmm. So I can throw those headphones on in line at the grocery store, play it on my car stereo at a traffic light, immediately get into writer mode, and I can switch it back off again when I'm done.
I'll try it. I sometimes a little white noise of like a cafe is okay for me, but the headphones thing, I can't.
It's easy to train your brain to write. I think it helps to write in the same place every day. If you can do any type of trigger to kind of put you into that mindset, it's helpful.
And I know you mentioned earlier, and I've read this as well. You're a big runner, and you live on an island. I mean, this book is set close to home, right? It's like or maybe it is home, I guess. It
actually is home, yeah. So the book is written, it's based on Newcastle, New Hampshire, which is where we physically live. And the haunted house is on a tiny little another island off our coast called Wood Island. All real places, and I expected to have to change all of that, but there's so many historical elements in the book. Every time I changed it, the rest of the stuff didn't make sense. And I got a lot of pushback from the agents and from other people involved. They wanted me to change those things, but I said, in order to do this right, I think we need to just kind of leave it as is because people are going to figure it out anyway. I would rather just tell them the truth.
Were they saying change it for legal reasons or just for privacy, your own sake?
At this point, it's the 21st century. The lawyers jump over everything just because of something that happened 50 years ago. So typically when you turn in any type of book, you have to give the attorneys a list of any real people that are in there, any real places. Then they go out and they get permission from everybody to use those things, or it just gets changed. Town names are a little ambiguous. You can get away with using an existing place. People use New York City all the time because it's New York City. When you get into the smaller towns, it's a little bit different. There's nothing that prohibits you from doing it. But again, I figured people are going to figure out where this place is in real life anyway, so I might as well just tell them.
And so in this real place on your island, you do a 4-mile run every morning, pretty much.
I do, yeah. I do a lap around the island. It's 4.2 miles.
Yeah, and that's a good time to think. You got the headphones on, you're thinking about the writing, and
yeah, I do it at the end of my day. So I quit. My work day ends at 3:00, and then I do the lap around the island. I think about what I just wrote, think about what I need to do the next day, and just kind of get my head on straight. And then I get home and spend the rest of the night with my wife and daughter.
Oh, that's great. So you actually kind of think about where you're going to pick up the next day. It's sort of the old Hemingway thing.
Yeah, I mean,
here's where I'm going to start.
One of the other things that I learned years back, I used to have these marathon writing sessions. I would knock out 5, 6, 7, 8,000 words sometimes in a clip, but I would be exhausted at the end. It's like trying to squeeze water out of a rock. And then the next day I would sit down and I'd stare at a blank screen for like an hour trying to figure out what to do next. And to me, it just didn't feel like a sustainable business model. Like I wouldn't be able to keep doing that year after year after year. So now I do about 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. I literally stop mid-sentence. Like I know exactly what's coming next. And I find that if I do that, my brain continues to work the story. So, while I'm watching TV, when I'm in the shower, having dinner, hanging out with friends, whatever, my mind is working on the rest of that story. And the next day when I sit down, I know, where I left off. I'm mid-sentence, I finish up that sentence, and I just don't stop.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like free work. It's happening in the background.
Yeah.
It delivers when you show up.
Yeah, I think the worst thing you can do, at least in my world, if I stopped because I had nothing else in me, like that's where it became problematic, because I would sit back down the next day and I still had nothing. I didn't know where it was going.
So you mentioned word count, and getting back to Stephen King again, sometimes like other writers seems to sort of visit the interview here as a through line that we keep referencing back to, and today it's Stephen King. But On Writing by Stephen King is one of the most terrific books about the craft of writing. I just bought it for my son. I read it years and years ago. He talks about a quota. Do you have like a word count quota that you try to do?
I do 2,000 to 3,000 words a day.
Okay.
That's usually it. I start at 7 in the morning. I turn off the internet first thing because it's just too distracting. Knock out my 2,000 to 3,000 words. That's usually done by like 10:30 or 11. Then I flip the internet back on, and that's when my inbox fills up with the whole business side of this. Right. And I deal with that until 3:00, and then the quitting bell rings. I used to do interviews at like I would take them whenever they came up, and when you're in as many countries as I am, that could be 2:00 in the morning, 3:00 in the morning. I would do it whenever I had to, but it was just burning me out. I couldn't do it anymore. So I force everybody to kind of get it done by 3:00.
Yeah. Where are you selling the most of your books now? I know, like, for example, Harlan Coben sells, for whatever reason, a ton of books in France. They love him in France. And Lee Child does a ton in Asia, because I think the Tom Cruise movie, they love Tom Cruise in Asia. So Reacher sells well over there. What's been working for you?
It's funny, foreign countries. I do really well in Spanish, like to the point where they actually put my name in front of Patterson's on the covers. I send them a box of those every year for Christmas, just because, there's only so many places where that can happen. I was just in Budapest, I guess, about 6 months ago, and my first time there. And I did.
Filming's happening apparently.
Yeah. It's a beautiful country, beautiful place to film stuff. But I'd never been there before, and I did a talk, and we had almost 1,000 people show up for this talk. To sign books, and like it's funny because they told them I was only allowed to sign 2 books for each person. So what that meant is everybody just kind of went back in line, because I'd never been there before. I had 7 or 8 books published, and a lot of them had every one of those books. So like I was there signing for like 3.5 hours. But like it is so incredible to walk into a foreign country where you've never been, and just and people know you, and people know you and know the stories.
Yeah. What do you, switching gears a little bit here? What do you think about book talk in 2 things? One as a there's sort of it's an influencing thing. It's a way to promote the book, of course, and sort of advertise and get things out, but it's also a way to establish yourself as a writer. There's a guest on the show, an author named Andrew Duplessis, and he started out publishing short fiction on Book Talk, and he developed a following, a community who loved him. He ended up having hundreds of thousands, 1 million followers or so. And it was almost the same way that you got into the traditional publishing lane through an indie thing. He got in through Book Talk. He had so many followers that HarperCollins finally said, wow, this guy's, getting pretty popular. And he got a book deal. Have you ever published any of your writing on Book Talk, and what are your thoughts about that as a platform? Because it's sort of making more and more news these days. Yeah,
I kind of approach all the social medias the same way. If I get a book review, let's say in the Washington Post, which is fantastic, or the New York Times, it goes out to all these inboxes, and people click on it, and they immediately go to a paywall. They've got to pay. If they're not a subscriber, they've got to pay to see that review, and it just kind of dies there. If I get a review from a blogger or an influencer, they write it up, they film videos, they promote it on all the different social social media platforms. They get out there and they hustle and get it out in a gazillion different places. I've gotten more of a response from influencers than I have from traditional media when it comes to creating buzz on books. And that's where it's all going, for better or worse. You can control some of it, other parts you can't. I think it's one of these things nobody really understands. So we all just try to scattershot and do all of it.
Yeah, more and more I hear people say the Times reviews, even if you're in the book review on the weekend, doesn't really sell books.
No, because nobody sees it anymore. The current generations, they get their news from Facebook. They get it from TikTok.
Nobody's
they get
getting the print. I'm one of the few people who actually gets the print, so I read it. But I'm one of
I still get Wired magazine at home because I can't let it go. Yeah, I like print.
So are you in touch with, I want to get to like what's next, but before I get to that, are you in touch with some of your old finance folks who were like one day working with you in compliance at some brokerage and now they're like, holy crap, JD is crushing it out there?
The company just had I think it was their 30-year anniversary or 40-year anniversary or something, but I went back to Florida for it. This was a couple of months ago.
This was a Miami company or?
They were based Boca Raton, Florida. So it was a little south of Palm Beach. So I got to see all of them and that was the first time after, because when I quit, it was, I think a lot of people wished me good well. They thought it might work, but they kind of figured I'd probably be back at some point. Yeah. But they've been following it, and it's just been getting bigger and bigger. It has been a crazy, insane ride.
Yeah, name above James Patterson, at least in Spanish.
In Spanish, awesome. Hey, I'll take it in Spanish.
By the way, I used to work down that way. I was before I switched over to writing. I was running a company that was in Palm Beach. So Palm Beach Gardens really was mainly where we were. But that part of Florida is great. It's, as you say, there was kind of one season hot and hotter, or 1.5 seasons. But then I remember being there in the summers at like 3 o'clock on the dime. A thunderstorm would roll in. You could almost set your watch by it.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. I don't know if it's global warming or what, but when I first moved there, it was the same thing. Literally every afternoon, exact same time, it would completely thunderstorm for about an hour. Then it would just break, and the sun would come back out, and it'd be crazy humid for the rest of the day. But yeah, you could set your clock by it, and now it's unpredictable.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So into what's next. One thing I wanted to ask you about that is book to film stuff. And have you or are you open to working on the screenplays of any of the?
Oh, well, that's come up before. So I've got 8 different projects in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell. Literally nothing's gotten filmed yet, but this one's been optioned. This one's got a director. This one's got a writer. This one, the director just left. This one's got a showrunner. This one doesn't have a show. It's this roller. Every time I get a phone call from my film agent, it's either really good news or really bad news. There's no middle ground with those people. But Caller's Game, the one that I gave you earlier, that one landed at Ridley Scott's company. And at one point they asked me to write the screenplay for it. So I sat down and gave that a try. I'd never done it before. My movie was 4.5 hours long by the time I finished it. Because when I write a book, I take out everything I feel is unnecessary. So the book is the book. That's the story. I don't know how to make it slimmer than what I've got on those pages. So I didn't take anything out, and it ended up being 4.5 hours long.
And they said, thanks, JD, but we're not going to use this.
Thanks, but no thanks. But it's funny how stuff comes around because, now, you take that to somebody like Netflix and it's only 3 episodes or 2 episodes. We could do a 2 or 3 parter.
Exactly right.
The world has changed completely.
Which is a way better way to treat a whole book. Like Gentleman in Moscow, that's not a movie, that's an 8-episode.
Yeah, I mean, when Fourth Monkey was making the rounds with the film guys, I had a phone call. One of the very first ones was with Ron Howard's company, and they started telling me everything they would have to take out of the book in order to get it down to an hour and 40 minutes and get it up on the big screen. And this character's got to go, this storyline's got to go. These 2 people are going to become one person, and it freaked me out. I felt like I was losing.
So did you have final draft? You're actually doing the screenplay work. There's that software.
Yeah. No, I did for a Caller's Game, but that was my only experience with that. I honestly didn't enjoy it.
Back to the novel.
Yeah, I like writing books. I know how to write a book. I know how to sell a book. So I'm just keeping I'm staying in my lane.
So a Caller's Game, where in the process with Ridley Scott is this?
It's not with Ridley Scott anymore. It's about we've got an announcement coming out. It looks like it's with somebody else. Properties in Hollywood, once they get picked up once, as soon as they're available, it's everybody seems to know. So Fourth Monkey has been optioned over and over again. This one's been optioned over and over again. But like I said, nothing's been filmed. Somebody once told me if you watch the credits at the end of a movie, watch all those names go by for 6 minutes, every person mentioned had to be there in order for that movie to end up on the screen. You take one person away and all of a sudden it doesn't happen. And that's literally what it's like. All these pieces have to come together. And if they don't, Patterson told me his very first book with Bill Clinton, The President is Missing. Showtime scooped that up. Ridiculous advance. I think they were 7 or 8 figures or something for that. They got 4 4 episodes in the can, and then COVID hit, and they shut down production, and they never started again. So they've got 4 episodes done of this show that will never ever be finished.
It feels like a miracle every time something makes it. There's so many ways it can go wrong and get killed, and yet so much garbage is made too. I'm always stunned when I turn on Netflix or whatever else. I'm like, how did that thing ever get made? It was terrible.
I don't get it either. I mean, there's so many good properties out there that never make it or get really close or get halfway there. And then, all this other stuff just kind of floats out there.
One other thing I wanted to ask you before we get into the lightning round. You did have thoughts on, this is sort of like your career has been so unusual in a way, like to go from indie first time out, 250,000 copies sold, and then you sort of cruise right in, and it's just been soaring ever since. There are a lot of people who want to get published, and it really is tough. I think what I found though is that sometimes it's easier to get published as a debut with BookScan out there, and you can see the track record. Like your track record was visible. They saw he just sold a quarter million copies. Like let's get this guy in.
Yeah.
But then there are other people who sell, 4,000 or 5,000 copies. It's actually tougher to get your next book deal for a track record, which is these days with BookScan totally visible. It's hard to get published as someone who's had a track record that's sort of mediocre than no track record, really. I think a debut sort of pitch can almost be an easier sell.
Yeah, and it's they used to take time. If they had an author where they knew the person could write, even if the first book didn't do that well, they would give them that second book, then they may give them the third book. As long as they saw incremental improvement, they would stand behind that person and help build that name. And that's what it took to build some of the household names that we have today. But in today's world, they just don't do that. You get 1 or 2 books, and that's it. If you're not a household name, if you're not worth it, they will drop you and they move on and just look for the next one and the next one and the next one.
Yeah. And to your point, the household names are aging up, and where's the bench?
Yeah. Somebody's going to have to figure that out really soon. I mean, I was at the Author Nation conference in November, and it's a much younger crowd than some of the other cons that I've been to, and most of them are going straight to indie publishing. They're not even trying to get an agent. They're not trying to go because they know they can do it. And if you're business savvy, you can do it. If you're willing to take on that extra work, you can get it done and take control.
Because the marketing platform is there. It's Book Talk. It's Instagram.
It's much easier than it was. Like even when I did Forsaken, a lot of these tools just didn't exist yet. Yeah. But in today's world, they're all out there.
How did you get it to 250, by the way? I mean,
it was word of mouth. So, the book, when it first came out, it did okay. But, like, the reviews were good. But, there's a discoverability problem with any new book. I called a friend of mine who used to work in PR back in the music days and told her, I wanted to see if she was willing to work on a book title. And we started brainstorming, ideas. And I told her about my failed trip to Stephen King's house, how I tried to get there but didn't actually make it. And she said, you know what? That's the story. So she wrote that up. It came out in a big publication. And when that came out, librarians saw it, bookstore owners saw it, people started talking. What I've learned all these years is the one thing that sells books is word of mouth. Yeah. You can buy as many Facebook and Amazon ads as you want. You can throw $1 gazillion at it. The second you flip off that switch, sales are going to dry up unless you have word of mouth.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that's the key. It has to be a great book. The word of mouth is never going to happen. You got to put in the time, review it, edit it, work it until it's great.
Yeah,
otherwise it's not going to move.
That's kind of a given at this point. It's got to be a 5-star read before it leaves the gate. And I tell people that all the time because, some of the other people I met at like Author Nation, they queried a bunch of different agents, got a bunch of rejections back, and they're like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and self-publish it. Like, that is the last thing you want to do. What you really need to do is find out why those people rejected the book, figure out what that problem is, fix the problem, and then try to put it out again. I think the only way you should actually self-publish a book is if it's good enough to come out through Random House or one of these other big guys, and you decide you don't want to go that route. Yeah. But they would if you'd let them. Yeah. Like that needs to be the decision.
Of course, not every author has that self-awareness. Everyone thinks their book's amazing. All right, so we're going to do the lightning round, but before we do that, we have to give a shout out to your amazing, cute daughter, Ember, who has been such a good sport here in studio. So well behaved and a charming presence.
And Ember and me are making our very first trip to New York together. We left her mama at home, so we've been in the city for a day now. And and she's been having a ball, but she wanted to come here for this.
And checked out the Museum of Natural History and the giant blue whale. How awesome is that?
The ghost whale, you mean?
The ghost whale. Is that what you guys...
It looks like a ghost because there's like lots of white mist around to remember.
Yeah. And it's massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what about the Museum of Ice Cream? Did you like that place?
There's a pool of sprinkles.
They've literally got a pool in the basement filled with sprinkles.
Oh my God! You can like jump in there?
Yeah, I mean they're like
There's
plastic
diving
sprinkles, but yeah, there's diving boards. You literally play in a giant pool of sprinkle.
And a sprinkle slide.
With
sprinkles flowing down instead of water.
That sounds extremely fun. I think I might go without my kids. I'm just going to do it.
It's probably better that way. It's like they took a child's dream and kind of brought it to life.
All right, so we'll do the lightning round. Feel free to phone a friend if you need to.
Okay.
Your favorite book as a kid?
Favorite book, probably Great Expectations. That was, like I finished up the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews, and I found Great Expectations, and I've read that one over and over and over again. To this day, I think it's still one of the greatest stories ever told.
Oh, that is a great one. By the way, I was a huge Hardy Boys fan growing up. I read all of those. That was sort of I went Frog and Toad, Hardy Boys, then into like Tolkien, probably, I guess.
Yeah.
Book or books you're reading now?
I just finished Never Flinch from Stephen King. I got lucky and got an ARC for that one. Really good. The guy always does incredible. So I've got that one, and I just started the latest Hunger Games book.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, I heard that's my daughter wants to check that out. She's been into those. Your favorite thriller or suspense or horror novel ever?
I would have to go with Dracula. Because like if I hadn't picked that up as a kid, I don't know if that would have really ignited that feeling in me. Like that really lit the fuse on everything that happened after.
Oh, that's great. I actually have never read as many. I've seen 100 different movies about it. I've actually never read the OG.
I ended up writing a prequel to Dracula for Bram Stoker's family a few years back. They read Forsaken, my first book, and I reached out and asked if I'd be interested in doing that using all of Bram's original notes and journals. And the answer to that is yes. You always say yes when they ask that question. That was a wild ride, being able to see Bram's notes and like basically the framework of Dracula.
His great grandkid.
I worked with his great grand nephew, Dacre Stoker.
Okay. Oh, that's great. And is he sort of in the business of vampires writing, or what?
He's trying to take on the family business to keep Bram alive. He was a history teacher and a tennis pro for the longest time. He is fantastic. He knows literally everything about Bram Stoker. So, I basically brought the creative side of things, but when I needed to know what Bram Stoker's bedroom looked like when he was 6 years old, Dacre could tell me right down to the pieces of furniture in that room. So when you read that book, there's a lot of authentic information in there.
Oh, that's great. I'll have to check that out. All right, this is a show favorite, as you know. Least attended book event ever.
Oh, every author's got one of these stories. So I actually had one with two people at it. It was a mother and daughter. The daughter was forced to go by her English teacher as an assignment, and her mom drove her. And that was one of my very first ones.
This was for Forsaken?
This was for Fourth Monkey, I think, or Fifth to Die, possibly. The people who owned the bookstore, they had just had a baby, so like they didn't have any time to promote it. I was on the calendar, and then they dropped out of life for like a month. Just a bunch of things went wrong, but I had fun. It's always fun.
They had a special time.
Like when I was
I'm sure she got an A on her assignment.
I'm sure. Like when I had all the rock stars and stuff in the car, the one thing that I saw consistently is like if they had two people in the audience or 20,000, they always gave the same performance. So I always have that thought in my head when I get in front of a crowd.
Oh, that's great. And now you go to Budapest and get 1,000, each buying several books.
I just as easily can walk into someplace and have 5 people standing there. You never know.
It still can happen.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing. Strangest question you've ever gotten at a book event?
I've had so many. I mean, the one that actually I get the most is where do the ideas come from? And like, I don't think any author really knows. Like, I don't know where my ideas come from. They just sort of pop into my head. Like I make notes of them. And, a lot of times it's 2 or 3 different ideas come together to form a book. But like everybody always wants to know, almost like there's this box
this jar.
I pick up the phone and a certain phone number I call and it, they just give me an idea or something. Like that's how they're going to get started. Like I don't know where they come from.
Which is actually that recalls some scenes in your latest here.
Similar, yeah.
Phone, the sort of spooky phone calls. Favorite few recent TV shows to recommend to the audience?
Ooh, I just watched something called Adolescence on Netflix. It's 4 or 5 episodes long, but what's cool about it is each episode is filmed with one camera shot, and they don't fake it. They actually use one camera from start to finish. And if you've ever been behind the scenes of any kind of production, you understand just how difficult a task like that is. It's almost like putting on a play for an hour long, except they're using multiple locations, multiple people, and it comes together seamlessly. So I recommend that one.
Check that out. I saw it on the Netflix scroll just the other day when I was watching. It reminds me of that scene in what's the movie with Ray Liotta? Is it Goodfellas? You know, that way they go into the back scene of the restaurant. They have that camera on them the whole way. It's just sort of a one camera shot.
Yeah.
Best and worst things about living on an island.
Oh,
Amber definitely wants to get in on the action here. On all this.
I think so. What's your
Yes.
what's your favorite part about living on our island?
Lots of grassy places to run around.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, what we love about it is it's quiet. Her elementary school is right across the street from our house, so we can walk her to school every day. And it's one of those places where the kids can still get on their bikes on a Saturday morning and disappear for the day, and we don't have to worry about them.
The whole circumference is 4.2 miles.
Yeah, the lap that I do, like I stay on the road, so it's probably a little bigger if you were to actually measure the island, but it's pretty small. There's I think 600 homes altogether.
Okay, and school, general store, groceries, the whole.
We've got a school, we've got a police department and a fire department. There's a tiny little store that has like basic stuff, and a small little restaurant, but not a whole lot. We have to go off the island if we want to get anything.
No bookstores.
No bookstores, not yet. I'm thinking about it.
There you go. Yeah, out of here. You got your imprint. You gotta have a bookstore.
Parker Books. It seems like it needs to happen.
Parker Book.
I think you've got your retail cashier right there. Our last question for JD Barker. One piece of advice for the audience.
Oh man, if you're a writer, just write every day. Just get in front of a piece of paper or computer or whatever, and just get the words done. It's almost like exercising. Like if you do it every day, you get stronger, you get better. And you'll eventually hit the finish line. And honestly, if you put 200 words down on paper every day, that's a novel in a year. I think that's achievable.
That's a great way to put it. Great. JD, thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for the White Russian.
You got it.